that's why we were so excited to have Star and Kate here to talk about different things. And so I want to also invite Kate Obenshain to join me on the stage. She'll have a fuller introduction later, but yes, please welcome her. Kate is a regular guest on Fox News and radio shows across the country, a writer, a popular national speaker. She served in a variety of capacities with the Young America's Foundation and was the chairman of the Virginia GOP from 2003 to 2006. And she's the author most recently of Divider-in-Chief, The Fraud of Hope and Change. I love that title. So we are here to discuss, and I want to make sure actually that your microphones are turned on, so you might just check, turn that switch on. But the first question that we've kind of did a little survey with our leadership community, or with our leadership committee, to determine what topics Oklahoma women were really eager to hear discussed. And there was a wide spectrum of questions, and so it ended up where some people's number one would be other people's number five, and vice versa. But there was a little sweet spot where almost everybody had this as about number two, so it ended up being a pretty popular topic. And Star, you addressed it really clearly in your talk this morning, but I want to ask again specifically, and Kate will let you start to hear your perspective on this, but how does the breakdown of the family spur the growth of government and vice versa, and why does it matter?
Really, you're the pro on this. Do you want to start? You go first. I'm
sorry. I'm just going to say one small thing then. I'm going to, because the data is still coming in on what happened in the last election, you know, when we break it down on our demographically, whether it's race or whether it's gender. But one thing that we are starting to see, when I say we, my organization CURE, we did a little research, is that in the Black community, Barack Obama fell about 2 percentage points. I don't know if anyone noticed that. The last time he got like 98%, this time he got 94%. But where it broke down was between women and men. Women voted overwhelmingly for him, but Black men did not in this last election. And so you're absolutely right that we look at these issues differently. We're assessing it now, but if you ask just for a gut, it's because women are not married, and so they're dependent on government.
And oh, go ahead.
Hi, everybody. It's so nice to be here with you. You all are so lovely to have me, and it's so great to be here with my friend Star. We love doing these panels together. We do them all over the country sometimes, and so it's just really an honor to be here. Thank you so much. And this is a very important topic that we're talking about, and that I think it's important for young people to talk about. Obviously, the breakdown of the family is dramatically impacted by the rise and the growth of government, because there is this shift that we've seen where individuals are no longer dependent on their families, that they're looking to as sort of their savior. I mean, Obama really does talk about government as that entity without which you cannot survive, that you actually need, that women in particular actually need the beneficent hand of government to reach down, and it's, by the way, it's down to women, because without that we are doomed to a life of squalor, and that somehow these government handouts provide us prosperity. I mean, that really is the way it's portrayed. You remember those women, that one woman on the YouTube video years ago, Barack Obama's going to pay for my oil and my heating and my new cell phone, and it's going to pay my mortgage. What? You know, that's you and me that's going to be paying for her mortgage. But there is this increasing sense that government is innately good, and that it cares about us. We all know government is actually not innately good. It's greedy, it wants power, it wants our lives, it wants the very essence of who we are, and it wants to continually expand. And those who are running our government now, particularly the one running the White House, thinks that he knows better than we as to how to live our lives, how to arrange our lives, what is good for us, what industry we should pursue, what is the maximum salary we should be allowed by government edict to make. So it is this pervasive ethos that's taking over that individual ambition. That's what we have to really quickly get out there and put up a bulwark against, because it's sapping particularly our young people of that ambition, that endless prosperity that can lie ahead of them. And young women right now are the ones we need to be appealing to, particularly those with college graduates, because young women are faring better economically than young men. Their salaries are higher in some recent studies. We'll see if that trend continues. But those women are open to our message. Get government out of my way. Not only do I not need it, but it actually cripples me. It cripples my family. And of course, we can talk about how it's not just government, but it is the rise of leftism that is destroying our families. The rise of the radical feminist movement from back in the 60s that has taken an incredible toll on the notion that family is good, not only from a moral standpoint, but from an economic standpoint.
There's an aphorism: subsidize something, get more of it; tax something, get less of it. So can you talk about specific incentives that are built into maybe our tax structure, our entitlement programs that encourage women to either deny family life, maybe to delay marriage, that sort of thing? So in other words, how are we subsidizing the breaking of the family and taxing solid families?
Oh, that's a really loaded question, because one of the discussions that we should have as a society is our tax code. We need to expand the discussion beyond the progressive tax code and dividing ourselves up whether we make a lot or not, and everyone have skin in the game. We should have discussions about a flat tax and or consumption tax as opposed to our progressive income tax. But that said, you're absolutely right. The incentives to not marry are alarming. When Kate brought up the college girl, and we've spent a lot of time on college campuses. In fact, it's one of the reasons that I know Kate so well. I've been lecturing for Young America Foundation for about 20 years now. I've been on 180 colleges, and thanks to them, I've been with other work that I've done to every state in the union except one, North Dakota, and I'm going there in a couple of weeks. So we have a real challenge on these colleges, though, is because what's happened as a result of now all families sending their kids through a public or government-controlled educational environment where they're learning moral relativism. It doesn't matter then. They've disconnected then what they've learned principles of in their home, or perhaps even from Christianity. So they go into these colleges as open sponges to this message of liberalism that's teaching our women to not value settling and marrying. So what's happened is they get in, they learn about a career, they go into career, and because a woman has the biological clock and men don't, there's much more assertiveness to start life and continue life and appreciate time in a different way. So as women progress, we see men back up, and in fact, major magazines are now looking at this dynamic now outside of Black community, in the white community, where they're beginning to see that same trend that has hit Black America, to where the more aggressive you see women, and I'm not using aggressive in a negative way, the less men do, and so our women are moving ahead. But what happens after they turn 30 is where we should be concerned. This is where government dependency comes in. After they turn 30 and they realize that they're aging alone, and now they perhaps want to settle and start family, the marriageable men for them, being 35-ish and through that area, are looking for the younger women. So we have record numbers of women now aging alone. And the more you look at aging alone, the more likely you are to then produce a child out of marriage, which we're seeing even the celebrities say this is okay now, and or depend on government because you have no one else to depend on. And that's where that whole discussion about death panels starts to come in. Imagine the day that you're aging alone and now you have to make a decision about health matters, and there's nobody there to help you make those decisions that loves you deeply and dearly.
Well, and more men are deciding not to marry at all.
Yes.
And a lot of it is coming from men. It's not just the feminist movement. It is the feminist movement in effect. But these men, for one thing, just not to be too crass, but they get whatever they want now, thanks to the feminist movement. That men and women, they've taught us that men and women's needs are the same. And so men, it's a free-for-all. It's the hookup culture. They don't even have to ask girls out on dates anymore. So they get what they want, for one thing. But also they're sent all these incredibly confusing signals. And I'm not totally absolving men, but they're sent these confusing signals from women. What do women want in terms of relationship and marriage and even civility and chivalry? That's pretty much gone now. But it is incredibly confusing for men. Does this woman who I want to marry, a lot of men, there have been articles and articles about this from the conservative side. The feminist movement has promoted this notion that men are basically legs with wallets, and that women now, some are saying, these young men are saying, you know, why would I get married to this woman who wants it all, and then she wants to have this huge career, but she's going to drop it all and just wants to live the good life and then let me take care of her. And it's just incredibly confusing to men as to what exactly women do want. Do they care about having a family and having a deep relationship, or is it just go from one guy to the other? Isn't that ironic that now women have that appearance of being these serial relationships, not even relationships? But I tell you, what's going on the college campuses, it is stunning. If you don't realize what they're teaching your children and your grandchildren, you best find out. The very first week of school, they have these mandatory freshman orientation programs, which, one, they're sensitivity training camps, but they're also these camps where they undo every sense of moral, what is right and wrong that you've learned for your entire life. They teach these girls, I'm sorry, ladies, it's so rude that I'm saying these things, to have every form of sex with every different variety and that you can possibly imagine. Everything's fine. That's part of what college is about? Really? Is that what we're sending our young women to colleges to learn? In fact, when Star and I go to these colleges and we present an alternative, what this crazy notion of traditionalism, and maybe actually wait until you find that man that is right for you, and maybe marry him to have that sort of sexually fulfilled life, and maybe have just one man for the rest of your life, and maybe wait for a guy to ask you out. And if a guy doesn't ask you out, it's not the guy you want to be with. I have lines of these young women coming up to me after my speeches, tears pouring down their faces. Thank heavens, well, I'm not from Mars. Thank heavens this is reasonable, but they are so isolated and alone. And think about what this is doing, not just to these women. We have this trail of ruined lives of these diseased young women who had this glorious idea until they got to college and all that was ruined. Think about what that is doing, not just to these young women at college campuses and the young men, but what that's doing to our whole notion of what is family, what is good, what is right, what is restraint, what is waiting for these choices. Government is so involved in that, because then government discourages marriage. There's a lot of talk about eliminating the child tax credit, per child tax credit. There's disincentive to have more children. It's incredibly financially burdensome to have large families. So there's so much, and of course the encouragement of dependency on government through welfare that is enhanced when you're gutting these welfare to work requirements. And Star is the pro. I'm totally out of my league when I talk here, but the notion now that government is allowing states, that the federal government, having reformed welfare and trying to encourage individuals to transition to full-time work, is now telling the states they can have work requirements, can be running errands for your neighbors, or doing all these bizarre things that do not count as work or fulfilling or giving yourself a sense of self-worth. So it's all tied in together. Not to say, having thrown all that out there, that it's hopeless. It is not hopeless, but you need to realize where it's all coming from. It's starting from the overgrowth of government, but really where we can help, we can actually see how we are helping, is focusing on these young women, focusing on what's going on the college campuses. Good heavens, what's going on kindergarten all the way through. We have got to start taking an active role and stop abdicating our responsibility, our collective responsibility as parents and as the moral guide for our children. Stop, heavens, please stop. We've got to stop abdicating that to our school system, meaning the federal government.
You just mentioned gutting the work requirements for welfare reform, and at our state legislature level, they're trying to really ensure that those requirements stay in place. And as a result, a local newspaper wrote an article saying that the legislature is waging a war on the poor. And we hear these terms all the time: war on the poor, war on women. Anytime we try to say that maybe you would actually be happier, and in fact, there is a correlation between earned success and happiness. You would actually be happier if you took more responsibility, if you met these work requirements to receive help, all those sorts of things. Anytime we promote that message, their reaction is, you are waging a war. So how do you combat that rhetoric, that just knee-jerk defensive rhetoric that seems to win people over?
I don't know that you can combat it, but I do know what we can do is go into the neighborhoods where the people that we're talking about live, and get more input from them, because they don't they have problems with the way that the system is designed themselves. They know that they are not getting the best benefit for their own personal lives, and that there are many restrictions and penalties. When you think about just our general welfare programs, if you do positive behaviors, you get penalized. They know this is the reality that they know. So sometimes it's best to find partnerships in these communities and have them come into the hearing rooms when you're talking about these issues, rather than it being the think tank world that's discussing other people's lives, that you have they themselves come in and discuss their lives. One classic example was in Washington, D.C., when President Bush signed into law that 1,700 children can get vouchers for $7,500 and go to any school that they wanted to through the DC School Choice Program. When the parent, though, they had means test on it. When the parent's income reached a certain point, certain level, she lost that ability to qualify for that program. When you marry the father of your 3 children and you're in the Section 8 housing, you lose that benefit. And these are things that this world knows very well. And so what they have to do is they work their lives around the new rules. So the one thing that I would say is that the legislature, especially here, because you have controls, just ignore the media and do the necessary work. It's kind of like your doctor, who's getting ready to put you under to do surgery. Well, we could fight them, but they don't listen. Notice doctors just have stone face when they come in to tell you that you got a cancer and that we're going to have to take it out of you, because they know that your first reaction is to want to break down and cry, but they know that they need to get in there and get that cancer. We have to get in there and get this cancer. The challenges, and Kate is very right that what Barack Obama tried to do is undo the welfare reform that was passed in the 90s. The only places that we're still seeing any type of success are in our red states. So our red states, it's where we even have the legislature, have to stand firm against the media voices. They wanted that to be a failure. It's not a failure, and the people that are in these systems know that the system is a failure. So we have allies. They're just invisible.
I think that the whole, and I'll talk about this at lunch, but this war against everything, it's incredibly effective, particularly with our elected leaders. I think they run heading for the hills as fast as they can as soon as the attacks start coming. I think we saw it in the last presidential election. You remember that the first debate? Oh my gosh, wasn't that a great debate when Obama didn't show up? That helped. But Romney was excellent. And I think that was a model for how we can respond to some of these attacks, because there had been already a bevy of attacks. You don't like women, you don't like black people, you don't like immigrants. And Romney came back with facts. He came back loaded for bear, and all of a sudden, particularly women, looked at him and said, well, maybe he's not that bad. He doesn't seem like the big bad beast that hates women and Neanderthal. And that really, and of course, the gender gap disappeared overnight, and then all of a sudden they started attacking a little more vigorously, and Romney, the gentleman that he is, just switched into defense mode and sort of ran for the hills a little bit. That's what Republicans and conservatives often do. These attacks are so bizarre to us. To be accused of homophobia or sexism or racism, we're like, what? We don't even think that way. We're so busy, like you all at the public policy group, we are thinking ideas. And we're thinking not men versus women, blacks versus white. What ideas are going to further us as a society and as a culture? And so our tendency is just stick with those ideas. Talk in, highfalutin, policy-like language that most people really don't get. We get because we think about this stuff all the time. But your average working mom who is just busy trying to get her kids' homework done does not have time to watch Fox News. So we can't just ignore the attacks, because the attacks gone unanswered are sinking in, and that's a big problem. People are beginning to think, oh, maybe they are racist, sexist, homophobic, everything else, because, boy, I don't hear a real compelling rebuttal of those attacks. Our ideas are the rebuttal. The fact that our ideas actually promote prosperity, that our ideas about welfare and welfare to work programs, you look at those areas, and that's where blacks and inner city folks are prospering. We've got to convey that in a compelling manner, not in this policy wonk language. Like a lot of our legislators, a lot of the folks on Capitol Hill, they are policy wonks. Oh my gosh. Mitch McConnell, who is, a great man, but I listen to him, my eyes glaze over, and I'm tired. I have no idea what he's saying. No emotion. Says, that's not going to work. If I'm falling asleep, and I love this stuff, it's not going to play to your average hardworking American who doesn't have time to think about some of these things. So we've got to be a lot more compelling. And I think this is what Star's talking about. Don't have the policy wonks responding to the attacks. You've got to have real Americans responding to the attacks. We talked about the HSA mandate on birth control. I'm really giving you my entire speech at lunch, so just put up with me. Instead of having, I think they had a group of elderly white clergymen. By the way, I'm not attacking older white men, just so you know, gentlemen. And anybody, I'm talking about being savvy at getting our point across. Having elderly white clergymen responding to the attack, quite rightly, that it was not a matter of wanting to take away women's birth control, it was a matter of religious freedom. Policy-wise, we were right on point. It could not have been a more disastrous optic. We needed women, all sorts of women out there saying, they're not trying to take away my birth control. I just want to be able to express my religious freedom in the way that the Constitution guarantees me that right. Women actually care about that. They care passionately about protecting our right to religious freedom. And we women should have been out there on the front lines talking about that.
I have a whole long list of questions I want to ask, but before I do, I want to make sure I give opportunities for anyone in the audience to ask questions too. So if someone has one, okay, hand just went up. Yes, please.
I would love to know how we can get the churches involved in pushing our conservative agenda. I live in Edmond, which is arguably the most Republican town in the state, and yet most of the churches in Edmond just take a neutral stand. What are you going to say? Don't forget to go vote on it. So what can we do?
Take away their 501c3.
Yes,
I have
please.
a question. The inflation rate is huge. It's
I'll repeat the question if that's okay.
real inflation rate is huge. It is higher than the Carter administration inflation rate because they took fuel and food out of the equation.
Yeah.
It hurts the poor more than anybody.
Right.
And it's really sad that we have not been able to articulate that these policies hurt the poor more than anybody. How can we carry that message?
Repeat the question.
The question was that the high inflation rate harms the poor arguably more than anyone else, and yet we never hear that the policies that lead to that high inflation are damaging the poor. And so how can we combat that or respond to that?
By the way, you're right. Nobody's even talking about the inflation rate, and they're able to do that because they do take out certain important factors. But you cannot inject $2 trillion of new money into the economy through quantitative easing and not expect massive inflation. It's something that we all need to be wary of from an economic standpoint personally, but inflation is coming. I'm not an economist, but I am, as a layperson, even I know it's coming, and it's going to be devastating to those who are paycheck to paycheck, who have nothing to fall back on. All of Obama's policies have been hardest on the groups that have turned out to support him most enthusiastically. Women, blacks, anyone struggling, and a lot of women are struggling. These policies have disproportionately hurt women. And again, that's what Romney did in debate number 1. He talked about how his policies, Obama's expansive government policies, are undermining businesses. They're undermining economic prosperity. Everything that's going on right now is undermining economic prosperity. But you never ever hear Obama explaining why, for instance, raising taxes on the job creators, why that's going to be good for our economy. He can't do it because it's not going to be. It furthers his goal of a socialist, redistributive economy, but he can't say that. He can't say that to any of us. So instead of defending his economic policies, he attacks the other side as morally inferior, as there's some moral failure on the part of us conservatives. We, for instance, hate middle-class Americans. We only care about corporate jet owners, millionaires and billionaires, the wildly rich. I mean, all sorts of crazy terms for those of making $75,000 to $100,000 and up. That's what it now includes: millionaires and billionaires. So they cannot defend it based on fact. We have to defend these things based on fact. We have to go on the attack. I know we conservatives are not always thrilled about that. I personally love it. We need to go on the attack and go after these policies that are decimating our economy. Why are businesses not hiring? Obama says it's because they're hateful. It's because they're greedy. It's because they're sitting on their profits. Why in the world would a business expand right now in this culture when they have no idea how dramatically taxes are going to increase, when they're not actually going to be able to pay their employees, when they're actually going to go belly up if they buy more equipment, if they expand their actual office facility, if they hire more people, where the health care expenses for those new employees are completely prohibitive. Obama says that we're cutting back our employees' numbers so that they're part-time, their hours so they're part-time because we're hateful, we're greedy. Well, actually, it's because Obamacare has mandated that if an employee works more than 30 hours a week, you have to cover their health care. You have to provide health care benefits. That cannot happen for some businesses that are operating at the margin. So they have to cut back employees' hours, or else they're going to fire their employees because they're going to close their doors. So the unintended consequences are devastating, and we have got to do a better job of talking about the specifics of how it impacts you and me. Make it personal, like Ronald Reagan did so well. Make it personal, because that's what it is.
I want to just add to that. We also have to define the terms, because when we talk about the poor and they talk about the poor, we're talking about two different people groups. When you talk about the working poor that Kate just talked about, these are the ones that have major challenges and need to hear our message. But when you talk about the government-dependent poor, inflation is not an issue. They have 100% paid for everything. Now, it might not be pretty, but it's 100% paid for. Their housing is 100% paid for. Their food is 100%. They not only get food stamps, they get WIC stickers. They not only get food stamps and WIC stickers, they get care at their children's schools. They get the breakfast program and the lunch program. They get a stipend. They get the 100% health care for any reason, no matter what that challenge is. And the best place to get the best quality of health care in their community is the emergency room. We don't understand the culture of this community that we keep talking about, and until we understand the culture, we are not going to be able to answer for them or speak on their behalf.
Oh, got a mic here. Working? There you go. Hello, my name is Seisha Fowler, and I am actually the political awareness chair of our ministry at my church, and I agree exactly with what Star is saying. My church is located on the east side of Oklahoma City, which is known as the Black community, 23rd and Bryant, and quite frankly, no one has been over there to let them know about the various issues. Every Sunday we get up and we say a political awareness nugget, and I can tell you how many people have come to me saying, thank you, Seisha, for letting us know about the issues. I think sometimes we often take for granted that people are taking it upon themselves to educate themselves. So even just a little 2 to 3 minute nugget, they gain so much knowledge, and with that knowledge comes inquisitiveness, and they might then go on and look for themselves. But the issue is, like Star is saying, no one goes into the community. If I could be frank with this audience, I can't remember a time where white conservatives or any conservative group has come to 36th and Kelly or 23rd and Bryant. We are here in the country club, and we wonder why change hasn't happened. Okay?
Well, and to your point, we need your card, because I got policy people that will come talk. So,
That's what we're looking for. We're having forms. I'll give it to you.
yeah, we'll be there.
Okay, yes, the question in the back maybe. I know it'll take a minute to get the microphone to you. Oh, okay. Yeah, we'll get to you then.
I wanted to say something about that, because I think there is a white guilt that we don't think we can talk to that community. And when you're saying what you're saying, it just dawned on me when you said socialism. They're socialist in the ghetto, and they're white in the capitalist in the suburbs. That was so, and when you're talking about, it's like they don't hear another message. You might as well say the sky is green, because if that's what they're taught, if they never hear anything else, just like what you're saying. But I think there is that we can't speak to the black community because we don't understand it. And I'd love to know, is that true? I saw this Harry Alford. Did you see the guy who's the president of the Black Chamber of Commerce? Anybody see him on TV the other night? He was awesome.
Yeah, he's great.
But tell us, what can we do?
Harry's organization represents 1.5 million black businesses in this country. In fact, he was one of our keynote speakers last week when we were at the National Press Club with a gun control discussion, a media press event. Well, one thing is why this meeting is so healthy. I'm just so pleased with what you're doing through the I'm gonna get the initials right, OCPA. I had to practice 100 times for that flashpoint because I knew they were gonna ask me, what are you doing here? And I was like, and then they had a liberal there, so I spent more time fighting him than talking about this group. But that's why this is important, because politics is business. Policy is business, and we have not approached it that way. It's not about individuals going into another community and saying, hey, we're here. You have a lot of ministries that do that, though, but they're still organized ministries that'll go and move into communities and try to help. And I'm not dismissing that help, but public policy shapes public behavior. And one of the problems that we've had is the public policies over these hard-hit communities has said anything goes. There are no natural consequences anymore. We have safety nets. And so the behaviors have gone out of control. So the opinion changed, and now the policies are changing. But through organizations like this, and now an invite to go into church, as I said, there are thousands in this country that haven't bowed to Baal. These pastors are willing to even use their pulpit, but they're not policy wonks. They're pastors, but they have churches that are open all the time, and they have, that's why we fight for school choice, because they have classrooms already available. If they had school choice options, they could get the kids in their local community to come in there and get a regular diet of this information. The people that need school options the most just don't have the financial ability to get the best schools that are in their local community. So to even do a forum like that, if the question is, if you did a forum like this and all of the panelists were white and they were given information to this all-black audience, would they receive it? The answer is absolutely yes. They would absolutely, and in fact, we've tested this many a times with my group. We did a forum a few years ago at Cato on tax policy. We took our 50 pastors over to Cato. That was interesting in and of itself, especially when they started praying over there. Cato Institute wasn't really all that pleased with that part of it, but Jose Panera was there and he loved it because the Catholic in him came out and he just loved those loud black pastors and they're praying over him. But But we tested it because what we did deliberately is we were discussing tax policy, and so we had one person representing income tax, one person representing the progressive tax, and the flat tax, and one representing the consumption tax. Or they like to call it something else, but I still call it the old school flat consumption tax. And we deliberately made sure that the person that was representing the flat tax was white, the person that was representing the consumption tax was white, and the person representing the income tax was black. And you could feel the dynamic, and we knew the dynamic after all of them completed their presentation, because for one thing is this one got up and spoke from the podium. This one got up and spoke from the podium. Mr. Brother thought that he was going to just relate to all of his brothers in the room, and sat down and just kind of like, this is you and us, and you can't believe a word these folks said, as if they were stupid. No, they actually heard all of the discussion, and as they heard all of the discussion, they came more to the conclusion, and the next thing we knew, we were having discussion at luncheon whether we should choose between the flat and the consumption tax. They totally dismissed this idea of an income tax. They understood, they get it. So yes, to answer your question is, if we went in there you went in there as a policy institute and set up a forum, and that church is willing to let you come in and share your ideas. Now, it might be awkward for a little while. It might be combative, because there are some ideas that are going to be confronting. It's new information, but the end result is truth sets people free. And I believe that there are enough people in these communities, especially in these churches, that recognize truth when they hear it.
We have another question right here.
Yes, I'm Estella Hernandez. I'm a business owner here in Oklahoma City, but also the outreach chairman for the Oklahoma City Republican Women's Club. Also at the state level with the GOP, we have programs in place where we are going out to the communities, not only the Hispanic communities, Asian communities, and I'm so grateful to know that you're here, because I would love to talk to you a little bit more. We want to engage the minority communities and let them know that we are there, and let them know that their issues are our issues as well. And it is. I know it's discouraging for a lot of Anglo-Americans when they go into these communities and they don't feel welcomed. Well, on that note, these minorities communities, they're not feeling welcome because they don't see your presence there. But we're changing that. And I want you all in this room to know that the work is being done. Slowly but surely, it's an uphill battle. We're going into the naturalization ceremonies. We are going and registering voters and just letting them know that the Republican Party, our conservative principles within blacks, Hispanics, minorities, we share those values. Those values within our party, that's what we believe in as well. But my question to you, Star, when I'm in my Hispanic community and we are engaging in good dialogue and letting them know that our values are their values, it has been engraved in their mind through the left that they're the ones that care. They're the ones who are there for them, and they're pushing policy that's in their best interest. And I've noticed even within the churches that they'll say, well, I've got to separate the values end of it with the political end of it. How and what other tactics would you suggest that we can go into these communities and say, that's not the case? What you have been told is really a bag of lies. And like you said, the truth will set you free. What other suggestions would you have for us?
Well, we have to get off of the front page of issues and go into the third page of issues, because these communities, as all communities, vote their economic interests. There are value voters that we wish that everybody would look at what they learn on Sunday morning and wish that people voted accordingly. But the reality is that on Monday, the reality sets in, and it's an economic reality. It's underappreciated how much government has done in these communities already. The number one employer of black men is government. So when they hear Republicans say cut back, they say, well, there's my job. The second largest for black women is government. So, when you look at all levels of government, look around the airports lately, the TSA has hired up a whole lot of ethnic minorities coming about welfare to work program. So, because you need to be literate, you didn't need to be have a criminal record, and you basically qualified. The minute TSA came into existence under George Bush, the offices for hiring were placed in these hard-hit communities because they knew that we had just told 5 million women they had to go out and get jobs. Well, where were they going to get them? Not much employment is going on in these hard-hit communities. So what do I mean when I say get off the first page and go to third page? We have to really think deeper, and with a policy center, you can, about housing projects. Housing policy. We know what doesn't work. Section 8, government-controlled housing projects themselves, these magnets. We know what doesn't work. Forcing anyone that's going to do any building through the construction industry to also build what they call low-income housing. These things don't work. But what we haven't done is to say, well, what does work? What ideas should we entertain? Should we perhaps say that if you are eligible for any of our welfare programs, that you get a voucher and you can go absolutely anywhere? And that absolutely anywhere could be in somebody's home where, an older woman whose husband may have just passed, who's thinking about maybe downsizing, could take in a woman who has a child and help them, as the scripture says, the older teach the younger how to live, how to love their husbands, how to love their children. So those are some of the things that we should think about. Healthcare policy. What is the perfect scenario in this case? Right now they're dealing with Medicaid and the partnership that Medicaid has with the state. And this is totally burdensome, not just to the taxpayer, but it's burdensome to that recipient. They go to emergency care because there's nothing else in the community. So we need to understand what they're confronted with. I'm not talking about having a powwow hearing session, because I tell you, those things can go on endlessly. Go out on a listening tour like what Hillary did, and all you hear is about social justice and how racist America is. No, I'm talking about getting into the policies themselves to say where we already know where welfare money is, if you will. In fact, Bush did I guess a disservice, in my opinion, when he brought that faith-based initiative to town and tried to put the churches on welfare. But one of the things that it did do is it showed us exactly every place that welfare money is. All of those 13 departments where he put a faith-based initiative means that they have federal welfare money in that department. So what we have to do is say, okay, what does the welfare, the programs that are set up for our poor, because this is not a question of ethnicity. This is a question of low income. And that's why it hits all communities that are low income. And if those communities that go into a relationship with government that are low income, you see the same social pathologies that we saw in the Black community because the Blacks entered in sooner. Our biggest challenge right now is the new Russian immigrant community and welfare policy changes. The new Russian that's coming into this country, those that go into the free part of America are breaking out. They're living healthy, they're getting employment, and in one generation they're going to break free. Those that are going to welfare community, we're seeing exactly the same pathologies that we see everywhere. On the Indian reservation is a perfect example of what happens when people are government dependent. So we have to wean them out of these dependencies. They're already there, and that's the challenge. They're there. They are in socialism. So how do you wean from socialism in the most gentle way possible? And that's what our legislators, especially in a state where Republicans are in charge, they should be looking into these things. They shouldn't. We're past the time of just blanket statements. We're just past it. This country is going to change very rapidly into a socialist state, and the only ones that are going to survive that are the very wealthy, because money's fungible, it can move. The people that are going to get hardest are the middle class, because they're going to have to either get wealthy real quick or live like our hard-hit communities live very, very rapidly. The front page of the paper today is reporting how many students now that are in a relationship with government with these student loans just can't pay that bill. So that means that now they're going to be more eligible for even more government program. We look at what happened in Obamacare with him saying, well, we'll just stay, go on a welfare program until you're 26 years old, because that's what it is when you start saying, well, I'm just going to depend on my parents a little bit longer because I just don't want to be responsible in my choices. And marry is what people used to do when they finished college or finished school. And so you're on the right track, but I think we have to now say, what are their concerns? We can't just talk about the moral issues with them. We've got them there. You're absolutely right. All of the polling shows that they are with us. They don't live like it, but they are with us. They know right from wrong. When we go in these communities, you don't have to explain to them whether these behaviors are right from wrong. They know they're wrong, but they get involved in it because they've been convinced that, well, the day I live, tomorrow I die, so why not? So what we have to do is now touch their moral concerns, or the social issue concerns, with their economic concerns. And this is something that, I'm sorry, we just haven't done the work on our side.
And the only thing I want to add to that is the social issues and the moral issues are an entree. And a lot of the establishment and a lot of conservatives right now are saying abandon those positions because that's why you're not winning elections. Well, those 3 or 4% of African Americans who did vote for us did so, a lot of them did so because of those social and moral issues. We haven't done a good enough job of using those as an entree, but I guarantee you, we turn our back on some of those core issues that are absolutely a leg of conservatism. It's like without that leg, it falls apart because a lot of people will have no reason to even consider conservatism or republicanism. So when you hear these elitists who have no idea what's going on in the inner cities or have no idea how to reach out to women, keep in mind that they are completely out of touch and that we cannot abandon one of the core tenets of what we believe because it is the way into a lot of people's hearts and minds, and then we can broaden it from there.
That is an excellent point. And because all of these economic questions are moral questions.
Right.
Theft is a moral problem. If you think that if you take away the moral component, then socialism becomes a good idea. Why wouldn't you want government to help you? Individualism and freedom is hard. But if you appeal to their heart and their head that here's right and here's wrong, that some behaviors are right and some behaviors are wrong, regardless of your social state. You know, a lot of people now know Dr. Ben Carson, and I'm so glad because he's been on our board for a long time. And I'm hoping that many of you now understand his story or have heard his story because it is so unique to discussions that we're having now. The reason that Dr. Ben Carson ended up the man that he is today is because his mom refused to go on welfare. And she worked 3 jobs. But the reason she refused to go on welfare was a moral reason. It wasn't an economic one. It is to your benefit to go on welfare if you take the morality out of the question. Because, as I said earlier, everything's paid for. If you take morality out of education, then it's just a utilitarian exercise to get stuff. Because if you ask somebody in the inner city, well, you got to go to school. Why? Well, so that you can, get a degree. What I need a degree for? So you can go get a job. What I need a job for? So you can go buy stuff. Well, why don't I skip the 12 years and just go get your stuff? These are moral questions.
Thank you, Star, for being here. I've been waiting for so long to say hi to you. I've got a book here I'd love for you to sign. I flagged a whole bunch of places in your the Uncle Sam's plantation.
That's my favorite.
You broke barriers for me. I became politically aware at about 2000, 2001 of things going wrong in our society. Part of it was me becoming aware of the changes that I had made in my life. I was a knocked up woman at the age of 30, gave birth out of wedlock to my oldest son, excuse me. And through the gracious love of Christ, I came to my own, almost went on welfare. Thank God the woman on the other end of the line said, girlfriend, you've got a degree, do not do this. And I tell you, I have struggled and struggled and struggled to understand why people go down that path. And in July, when my older son moved away from home, went off to the Army, thank God he did not go to college, because that was a battle that I feared more than him losing his life in Afghanistan. Wow. His losing his spirituality and his touch with his Lord terrifies me more than his physical death. So in July, I did something radical for me, and for my 556 friends on Facebook, I'm very sorry, but I shut you off. Because here's what was happening. I was so wrapped up in what other people were saying. I had shut my TV off a long time ago. I used to watch Oprah until I saw planes crashing into the World Trade Center buildings, and people who should know better were saying it was an accident. There's no way. And I just started asking all these questions, and I've come to realize that what I'm hearing here, we have allowed a small group of people, primarily in the media, to put on pedestals politicians and entertainment people, to divide the lines between races, between rich and poor. We, in our own homes, need to sit around our dining room tables. This is what I'm telling people when they call in and they talk to me. Sit around your dining room tables and have this discussion, because you're not going to get it from the news. I hear people saying, tell me what I can do. Tell me where I can turn. Tell me how to vote. You can't wait. You need to start in your own home around your dining room table. Go into your community. I went in July when I shut off Facebook. I started volunteering for the Hope Pregnancy Center, teaching abstinence education in the inner city. There is a waiting list of 18 schools. We need people, and especially if we can get men, we need people to go into these schools, because in 8 weeks of telling these kids that maybe they have a different choice, I learned that, one, there's a thing called generational poverty. It's now a career choice. These people don't know any better in our inner cities that there's another way to live if we don't show them and talk to them about it. I had a young boy tell me he had never been given the choice of not having sex. Blew me away. I'm like, what? When you don't have parents that are raising you, who didn't have parents who were raising them, who didn't have parents who were raising them, what do we expect? And the reason we don't know our neighbors. These kids live 2 miles from my house, and I didn't know them. And by the time I left that school at Centennial High School, I had girls coming up to me thanking me, because it wasn't just about an unwanted child. It was about purity, not just of sex, but purity of their souls. And they needed that glimmer of hope. So I'm just saying, there are opportunities. Thank you for being here. There are lots of us who are wanting to break these barriers, and I think we can do it. And Oklahoma is a great place to start.
Thank you.
We're going to do one more question, and then we're going to take a quick break before we move on to our, and that's the whole reason why we're having this discussion, because we in Oklahoma can do this.
You know, Reagan said in his farewell address that the most important thing is for us to start talking around our dining room table with our children, because no longer are we passing along this unabashed admiration for America and all that she stands for. We're just assuming that our kids get it. And Reagan actually said, kids, if your parents aren't doing this, bust them on it. Make them talk to you at dinner tonight. I loved that coming from Ronald Reagan. And just the one other thing that I wanted to say to you, you're a tremendous example of such a courageous success story in so many ways. And we conservatives have to embrace women like you and women like me and women like Star, particularly single moms out there who never imagined that we'd be in the circumstances that we are, Christian women or whatever. Our conservative movement needs to reach out and embrace and stop with the judgmentalism. And realize that, you know, we can't get into people's heads and we can't know their circumstances or their childhood. And we have to be welcoming and accepting of all, not just women, but we have to welcome them and want them and stop with this sermonizing, but truly reach out to the hearts of women who have been through it. So thank you.
Yeah, and on that note too, you know, I'm asked often, especially in media, well, you know, is the community, African American in particular, too far gone? I said, no, it's just one generation. If we would teach boys to work and girls to wait, that we could break this. And the best way to do that is not just through our crisis pregnancy centers, which are absolutely going into these communities. There's this amazing movement of the 5,000 centers. They've organized them in the country. They're organized themselves. They're getting the type of funding that they need to go deeper into these harder hit communities so that they can give them a message. We're battling, a couple of years ago, the University of Chicago study that said marriage is for white people. This is what blacks have been conditioned to believe. And so you're right, it's not, it's unheard of. You're against the culture of the community to even think about marrying the person that you know you kind of love and you want to be together. That's why they end up with several children by the same person, but they just won't make that final commitment. One of the pastors up in the Chicago area, he just went ahead and started a program where he just takes young boys to weddings. And when the media asked him, well, why? He said, because they've never seen one. We live in a bubble thinking that everybody is just like us. They just I don't know what kind of conclusion people come to anymore about why when we look into our inner cities, we see that type of behavior, and we just kind of shake our heads as if it's just normal to their culture. These are not normal to our culture. As I said in my presentation, 70% of Black children were raised in married households. Now, that might still sound like we had an alarming rate of out-of-wedlock birth, and we did. But when you think about the legacy, history of Black people in this country, it's pretty cool to get to the point where, you have family intact. Families stayed intact all the way until the 60s, and it started collapsing as soon as they started this social engineering of the federal welfare state. So what we need to solve the problems, and they're very, very solvable, getting back to the question in the corner, we can look at these other policies, but we have to embrace these crisis centers that are starting at that fundamental first step. Oh, these problems that we're seeing in these communities are rooted in sexual activity. So our crisis centers and then our schools. We've got to get vouchers. And I know that, there are some communities of people, in particular Protestant community people, that look at private school as a major accomplishment in their life, and so they like to keep it in the elite environment and don't think of it as mission work like what the Catholics do, and why they stay in our hardest hit communities to say, no, these vouchers are not for the middle class and or even our wealthier class. They already have school choice. These vouchers are specifically for these impoverished communities so that their children can go to schools in their local community that teach a moral framework. Every voucher program we have in the country right now, we have several, are in our hardest hit communities. They have the means tests are very, very rigorous. They have to be the poorest of the poor, the most impoverished community, have to be in the most broken school, and they have to have a broken family life even to qualify. One example, when we had the one in DC, the voucher program there were only 1,700 of these vouchers, and the means test alone to be able to qualify, they still received 30,000 applications. And when Ted Forsman and John Walton, before they passed away, both of them, but they left us a beautiful sampling of how well school choice can work in our country and how demanding it is of these poor people to get their kids out of these government schools. They had about 30,000 of these scholarships available just to test to see, can we go out and get vouchers, because then all the left was beating us up that, oh, you're just trying to take the cream off the crop, and these things are for rich white people. Rich white people have school choice. They just buy a building and put their name on it if they want school choice, and they can get Johnny its own instructor. So these poor kids were so desperate when they found, and their parents, they found out they had 30,000 of these scholarships available. Their means tests were hard too. You had to be the poorest of the poor. You had to be in the most broken environment, in a failing school, and failing in that school. 30,000 vouchers available. They got 1.3 million applications. So we want to solve this: school choice in crisis pregnancy centers.
I just want to echo what Kate said, because you almost said verbatim what I was going to talk about. One thing that I think that we have failed to do is to be compassionate, and because the other side has been very good at portraying us as these are the hateful, non-compassionate people. And it's not a white or black issue for me in my community. I'm in rural Oklahoma. It's a poor issue. But we as a community have the responsibility to reach down and figure out a way to get those people that are struggling into a system that will show them a path to get to be where we want them to be. And the biggest problem that I'm having is this, in education, is this statement that we need to lower the standards that are there for the minorities and for the poor, because we should not expect as much from them. And that is a biggest challenge that I've found, and a lot of bruising personally on that issue. But I think what we have to do is we have to give them the other side. We have failed to be loud on this. We have two newspapers that compete on the education issue. You read it today, we got one op-ed, we got another op-ed, and the biggest mistake that we have made is not standing up and saying as loudly as the other side has that we expect more from our kids. And I think that we have to be more compassionate and be louder.
Yeah, I think so too. I think President Bush talked about that too. He called it the soft bigotry of low expectation. There's a concept that is being discussed abroad in some of our third world countries. It's called charter cities, and it's something that the policymakers in the room might want to look into. It's not tried here in our country because government welfare is an industry in of itself, and the perception of racism is an industry of itself, and they work together to make sure that no new ideas are tried. But when you have the flexibility that welfare reform allowed in your state, you can do some things which are to comprehensively look at an area and pull out that area, similar to what Jack Kemp talked about in terms of an enterprise zone. The enterprise zones are law of the land. We have them. We have them in many of our hard-hit communities, but they're only looking at the economic side of a person's life. And it's actually become a good old boy country club that if you're involved in that economic enterprise zone scenario where you can get government grant for just locating your business in a impoverished community. But if we did a concept, or if you considered something here, like on the model of this charter city, it's an economist, I forget the school he goes to, but it's Paul Romer is his name. He's building out this concept of where, and I've thought about it, in lots of thought toward it, because I would look for an example here if we could ever find someone that had the guts to pull together all of these components, to look and pull together like draw a square. We're going to red line ourselves and say, in this square, if you're in this particular zip code, you get exempt from the minimum wage laws. You get exempt from government schools where you can take a voucher any school you want to. You get, if you're a business in that area, you get reductions in your taxes and the regulatory burden. This is why many businesses are not placing themselves in our hard-hit communities, because they've been test zones for the environmentalists and anyone else that has ill intention. They've just been guinea pigging these people. And, you know, the list is long, not that much longer, but my 56-year-old brain's not letting me get all of the ideas, but you test all of them at the same time. Oh, housing policy, where they just go anywhere they want to, you know, and collapse HUD. You know, why should the government be in the housing business to put poor people in a HUD house to pay the welfare check money back to the government? This is madness, to where now, because there's a limited supply of these houses, because the government decides who qualifies to be a part of their little HUD game, so there's a limited supply, but there's a major demand, so the prices are skyrocketing. You try to live in an inner city community, you would not believe the type of rent that the government is charging us, the taxpayers, because the woman, she might only be paying $100 a month, but we, the taxpayers, would be paying, in some of these situations we looked at, $3,000 a month for a one-bedroom in the middle of the ghetto. And it just goes on and on and on. And then politicians in Washington, when they're looking for places to cut, it's like, well, what about HUD? $60 billion? I think it might be a good place to look for some of that 85 billion you want. So I'm glad to have these ideas in exchange, and I'm glad that you guys have invited me to be a major part of this. I think this is my last presentation this morning. I get to just enjoy with Kate and her presentation later, but I did wanted to express that I've been thinking about these things for quite some time. My organization is CURE, the Center for Urban Renewal and Education. urbancure.org is our website, and so you have a friend in Washington that if you, especially legislators in the room and your policy center, if you're looking to say, okay, here's an area that maybe we should try to investigate a little bit more, we'll do all that we can to help look into it and dig into that third page so that we can start talking about the real problems confronting our impoverished communities, so that they will look at us and say they really have the answer to what we need.
Well, I know some others, I know that there are more questions, but I think we want to just go ahead and break so we can stay on schedule, but I'm sure Star and Kate would be glad to take questions, maybe in this break, if you don't mind, people wanting to still talk to you. But let's give them a round of applause. We really appreciate it.